Hi, welcome to our podcast. I'm Mary Abazia, and with me is Sean Wellen and Tom Spitali. And we have been exploring using our tools. Our tools are over 40 years old, but with the introduction of AI, it really has kind of just lit up our tools and allowed us to do just so much more with it that this particular podcast is going to focus in on how we're using value proposition and infusing AI into it. So, Tom, do you want to take the first stab at this?
Yeah, first of all, we distinguishing between positioning and value proposition. Our last podcast, we talked about how AI is helping with positioning, and sometimes firms use positioning and value proposition sort of interchangeably. Let's just be very clear. When we talk about positioning, we're talking about the promise you make to the customer, branding, positioning, kind of Marcom things. With value proposition, we are talking about how you fulfill that promise. So typically, we begin the discussion with talking to people about picking their two most important segments and creating a value proposition that includes, how is the core product potentially different for two different segments? How is the augmented product, which includes the packaging, and instructions and different things that surround the product. How are those different for two different segments? There's a services level, and then there's an information and consulting level. And what we're really hoping with value proposition is that at the end of the development of a value prop for two different segments, they look really different so that you're treating different customers differently. A journey that we started all the way back when we defined the segments in a needs-based way. So that's what we mean with value prop. And before I think we talk about how AI is helping, it'd be really great, Mary, for you to share your example that everybody finds really fascinating, which is the sugar cartel and S26 and all of that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit just to kind of get everybody
Yeah,
in
no,
the mood?
yeah, I'd be glad to. And just to add to what Tom was saying too is we like to think of value proposition as I'm propositioning you with value. And the more value I give you, if it means something to you, hopefully you're willing to pay for it too. So it's that exchange that we're looking at. And one of the companies we worked with a while ago, we sold products to potato farmers, and it was a great product. It was called Sencor, and along came another group, the Sugar Cartel, and they demanded that they get a lower price. And so the company thought about all of the elements of the value proposition and started peeling away parts of it. So, for example, the farmers, they were receiving the product in very convenient packaging. And they said to the sugar cartel, you're going to get it in big drums instead of some easy package. And by the way, you guys have to come pick it up on the back dock. Whereas the farmers, there were easy places for it to be delivered or pretty much close by. And then from a financing standpoint, the farmers had, terms. They had met 30, 60, 90 to help them with cash flow. Sugar cartel, no dice. They said, you just bring the cash and you pay when you pick up the product. So you can see how, in a very simple way, two different segments had very different value propositions. Even the name Sencor for the farmers was reduced to S26. So they had even a different name. And by doing that, having these two different types of offers, they were able to charge a lot less to the sugar cartel and maintain their good pricing with the farmers. Now, one other part to this that was really key was that the biggest customer that these potato farmers had was McDonald's, and McDonald's is tough at negotiating. So it was incredibly important for them to say, what are all of the needs that this potato farmer has? Not just the chemicals and that, but what else is really a pain point for them in their business? And it was this negotiation. So they held a smart potato program, which was to teach them all the business ways to negotiate. And they maintained that for that group because they had enough, profit in there to support that type of program and make them even stronger. So it was even more of a contrast when you look at that. So that's the two different value propositions that they offered, and it worked very well. It was very, very successful for a long time.
So that's
So
not lukewarm tea, not making
right.
the same product for two segments after you've done all your work. What have you guys noticed?
Even though the chemical, but to your point, the chemical is exactly the same inside.
But the core product is exactly the same thing. So anyway, it's a beautiful case study of how value propositions for two different segments can be extremely different. What have you guys noticed that has been sort of subpar about value propositions in our workshops? Why do people struggle? Because I think AI helps with that, but let's kind of like set the stage a little bit.
Yeah, Sean?
It depends on the product, in my experience. Some products lend themselves a lot more to putting a fancy hat on them and position them with that augmented product. Some more consumer products maybe lend themselves to that sort of expansion of the offer from core product to a more specific packaging or presentation. I think, and that's is leading into where I think the problem is when you have typical B2B products, and most people have been thinking consistently about the product attributes, about what it does. All through our workshops, we try and get people to think more in terms of through the customer's lens, not through the product lens. But that runs deep. And especially when we come to value proposition, people are often so into the product, the thing that's in the box, if you will, that they don't naturally think of how could this be augmented, how could this be presented differently for different people. So I think it's not just for value prop, but I think one of the biggest barriers is simply that in our experience we deal with product people much more than we deal with customer people, and that would be the essence of it, I think. And that's where AI can
Yeah,
help break that logjam.
I think well, and I want to add to that is, you have your core product, and ironically, a lot of companies really can't differentiate on that core. So this is the crux of strategy is I have a piece of equipment and it pretty much is the core product. But then that what you were mentioning around it is the augmented product, is how it's packaged. Maybe there's items that support it. Medical devices, there's always disposables. So there's things that are augmented that support it. And that may be where you start to differentiate. And then service is the next ring out. And I think people forget they think of it as a throwaway and they give it to everyone. So there's two problems there. One is it's not a throwaway and not everyone needs that. So that's where segmentation, the beauty of it starts to really come about is some people really need that service and they're willing to pay for it. And other ones don't want it, don't need it, won't pay for it. So once they get into the mindset of that, then I think we start to see a lot more. And then now with information, which is that last ring, boy, the things you can do with information if you really want to help your clients be smarter as well. So
Yeah, I think the further you get out into the rungs, the easier it gets to be to differentiate. And I think another problem is that people are just tired by the time we get to it. It's been anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 long days of really thinking about their products and services. And sometimes it's just really hard to get creative, but this is a place for creativity. So that's where AI really, really can help. I mean, one of the things that we've done with our own system is we've loaded in all of our articles and both of our books and all the content that we can put into the system because it does contain a range of value propositions that people have put together in different industries. So just from the standpoint of our own system at Impact, we can immediately say, hey, can we get some other ideas of how others, maybe not necessarily in the same industry as this client, but in other B2B industries, how have they handled this? What have been value proposition elements that they've included in a winning strategy to the market? And then of course, if you were using an AI system, you can go out beyond that. Once it understands what you're looking for, it can look beyond even, our own resources to kind of see what else is out there that people have been doing to differentiate their products and services for different segments. And that's where we found the pay dirt, if you will.
I
The
think
other
also,
thing, oh, go ahead, Sean, please.
I was going to say it also because the power of AI is it has such a capacity to look in different directions and at different depths. So you want when we talked about on the previous podcast about positioning, we talked about one of the concepts is your positioning has to be meaningful. It has to mean something to the people you're targeting at. Same with the value prop. If you differentiate your product in a way that isn't meaningful or valued in any way, then obviously you're wasting your time. So you've got to think, how do we enhance the product, augment it, add services, add information, consulting rings in a way that matters to certain segments, which was to Mary's point about understanding the segment. So you're targeting the offer very specifically. But then you've also got that bedrock of historical value props and looking both back into the past. And we worked with a client, and it was called look back and look around was this concept. And it really applies here. But AI is very good at looking back and looking around. It can look back to the benchmarks value propositions, but also look around at cases that may not be directly related, but then also look at the needs base of the customer and the segments and tailor those augmentations and those services to that. So it has this ability to look in a 360 way very deep and very quickly. And that's another thing that people struggle with. There's quite a few moving parts to getting a good value proposition.
So I have a couple thoughts on this. One is that a value prop costs you money. So, as you're saying, okay, we're going to build out more service for this one segment, the math always comes in. It's going to cost me more to do that too. And what I love about AI is you can simulate the impact on those. So if I spend, $300,000 to build this new thing, how is it going to help me in the market? Because that's the hardest part of being a marketer is someone's going to say, well, how can you help me understand the payback of this investment? So when you use AI for simulating different value propositions, and if you do any conjoint analysis, you can even, simulate more and then feed that into AI. It helps you at least have a good approximation of what payoff you'll have in the market.
Yeah. I think the other good thing, Mary, that we found is we found asking our system what of our current value proposition is not valuable to this segment. It's been useful in helping to defeature, as you kind of talked about earlier, in your example with the sugar cartel, that basically was a defeaturing example so that you can meet a particular price point. We found AI to be really helpful in that regard. The other thing I want to say about what Sean said earlier, you can't just go into an AI system and say, what kind of value proposition should I offer? I mean, at this point in our process, you've determined, who are the important stakeholders, how are their needs different via segmentation? Who do we want to target? How do we compete today? Right? You've all of those things. So at this point, you've got all of these tools that have helped you get to a very specific place. And the more specific that you can get with whatever AI software you're using, the better your results are going to be. So there's a lot that it takes a lot to get to this point.
There's a
Yeah.
sorry, Mary, go on.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that there's just a really important thing that Tom just mentioned there, and it's you use the words, you can't just go into an AI and ask it for a value proposition, and of course you can, and people do, and what they get back is not particularly relevant to their case, right? And that's one of the way that AI can fool you if you don't apply it for the very specific use case that we've been learning and evolving over the past few months. Because yes, you can go in and say, I want to sell hats and give me a value proposition, and it will confidently give you a very detailed value proposition that will be possibly meaningless in the actual reality of your market. And that's the key to look out for, right? That it's not as simple as just asking AI. It's how you ask and what you seed it with, and how you create that relevancy, and not just get blown away by the magic that AI still appears to be, to me anyway. You just ask it and it starts talking to you. It's magic,
Yeah.
but it's also very wrong unless you point it in the right direction.
One of the other things that we've been using it for is companies have said, my competitor is about to add a new feature or a new element to their value proposition. How much grief will I have? Do I need to start developing that too? And so we've been using AI to simulate, if my competitor does this, how much might it impact my business and where might they go? And that's a whole, it's always been interesting, but now you really can step it up when you're doing that analysis, that competitive analysis. So we hope that you think about using AI in some really interesting ways when you're developing your value proposition, and watch out for some of the traps that we've talked about as well. So thank you.
Thank you.